Hey everyone, this is Dr. Corey Glenn with Transcendental Education, and I'm going to do a video here on how to address the situation where you might have a distal extension guide. So if you look in this case, we've got 3 implants that are going to be going behind the most distal tooth here. So if you think about just the stability of the guide, it's going to be really stable on the teeth back here, but you could imagine if you've laid a flap and this is just basically hanging in midair back here, then when you're trying to drill those distal implants, you could potentially have some dipping. Obviously, we're relatively close to the nerve here, so that's something that we want to avoid if at all possible. Just a quick plug, we are doing our Guided Surgery Basics and Beyond course coming up on December 3rd and 4th of 2021. If you're interested in that, just go to transcendde.com. We've got online and in-person options for that, and this would be something that we definitely cover in that course. Okay, so I'm going to basically show you 2 different methods of how you could deal with this. And we'll go from the easiest up to a little bit harder, but probably I prefer the latter. So the first thing that you could do is just consider doing your normal guide, but incorporate a pin. Okay, so let's show that. If I was to go up here to add implant and choose a pin, this is just the standard Blue Sky Bio pin, and we want to avoid that distal tipping. So I'm going to try to put it in between these last 2 implants here. And then I'll do the fine tuning and positioning in this window. This is the tangential window. So you do want to think about surgical access. You're probably going to need to come in more from the front of the mouth. And then obviously make sure that your pin is not impinging into the implant sites. And then, again, just to get easier access, I'm going to put a slight angle on it. And then I want to make sure that it's going all the way to the lingual plate, but not through it. There's a lot of stuff in the floor of the mouth that you definitely don't want to potentially wrap up by drilling too far and having a burr spinning in the floor of the mouth. So this would be an easy solution. We could simply now turn on the guide tube and then go ahead and make the standard guide. So I'll do that real quick. Go into guide panel. We'll draw the curve. And then you'll have to bring this down just enough that it incorporates that pin, and then I would follow more of a traditional guide contour. So usually I do that right at the CEJ of the teeth, and then we'll come back around near the CEJ. Now when I do these procedures, I would generally lay a flap, and so I don't really need that to go way down on the lingual. I would want it to probably just be on the crest so that it would minimize how much flap I have to reflect. But that to me is a better option than doing flapless surgery. Very few people have the keratinized gingiva to spare for you to come in from the top here and cut out a big chunk of their keratinized gingiva. Now you're back to how do I get adequate keratinized gingiva around it. So this would be an option. You could create this surgical guide. Okay, and there's the end result. So this would be option 1. You would put this guide on. The way I would do it, I would go ahead and lay my flap and reflect down to just enough for this to seat, and then I would drill the pinhole, insert the pin, and then that should eliminate all the tipping as you're pressing down back here to drill. Okay, so that's option 1. Now I'm going to go ahead and hide that, and let me now show you option 2. We'll get rid of this pin. So option 2 would be to actually create some direct bone level stops, and that's what I prefer to do. And so what I'm going to do is some bone segmentation, but I've only got to do a really isolated area of it. So before I jump into bone segmentation, always make this panoramic trough nice and generous, and then let's go to model editing and open up bone segmentation. We'll do advanced jaw segmentation, and I don't have to do a huge area here. I could maybe do from there to there. I'm really only concerned with the crest of the ridge, so I'm not trying to go way down on the buccal. So let's go through the segmentation now. And I'll hide these implants because I don't really need them here for this. So if you've not seen my videos on segmentation, you basically got a group of tools up here, the intelligent lasso. So the first thing I do is I try to use the intelligent lasso, and I want this density as low as it can be before I start getting lots of scatter. Now, what do I mean by scatter? Well, let's lower the density to 200. Now you can see it's clearly not staying within the boundary of the bone. So let's just start sneaking up on it. Still too much. I'm Control Zing to undo that. Let's go to 400. And that looks pretty good. I'll go with that. And so we need to fill the holes, okay? And if you've got a defect in the bone, you know, I would go ahead and fill that in. Who knows? You could have taken the scan, you know, several months back, and you know, at that time they had more of a extraction site defect, and now they've healed up a lot. So I would try to include anything that you think might could heal in. So you could follow just the prompts on the segmentation menu, or what I prefer to do is I will go and kind of go to the very top and the very back slice of each view and try to define that. So here we've got it. Let's go to the very bottom. And right there, that's the first slide. So I'll select that, fill the holes, maybe brush that in just a little bit in case there's some healing that's occurred. And then maybe we could do the cross-sectional slices. So I like to go to the very distalmost slice. Okay, right there. And I'm going to define that one. Now watch, by virtue of the fact that I defined this very bottom one, normally I would have to draw that in to fill the holes, but here, since I have a lower boundary, it fills that in for me. Let's come to the very front. Fill the holes, and then we can just kind of scroll through here and continue doing some more. This is that defect, so I might fill that in a little bit more. So I don't have to go crazy. This is a mandible with a good dense cortical boundary, so I don't really worry about it struggling too much with doing this segmentation. You know, maybe go back and do a few more axial slices, in particular up closer to the crest. And then one other thing I would suggest is, you know, the segmentation prompts are only going to have you do axial and cross-sectional slices. But one thing I find helpful is if I go to the panoramic view and let's say I click, you know, right in this area. So that centers my view there, and then I can change to implant tangential. And the reason this is nice is because I can get a view here that is going to be commonly missed with the other axial and cross-sectional slices. So right on the crest of the bone is probably going to be the most likely spot to, you know, maybe have something missing. So if I can actually define some slices that fully incorporate that, that's going to really help me a lot. Okay, and then I can twist it a little more and just do a few different views in this window. If you have anything left out, make sure to go back and brush that in. And maybe a couple more here. So the biggest thing I noticed with segmentation is a lot of people feel like they've got to just follow the prompts. You can actually just go in whatever order you want, do whatever different views you want, and that's oftentimes what I choose to do because I can get more strategic views than, you know, just doing it with the wizard. So I'll click next a bunch of times and go ahead and just let this process. So there's my segmentation. It's about to figure it up. And now let's scroll through and see how good of a segmentation this is. So anything that's indicated in red is what the software was able to segment, and this looks pretty good. I don't really see any missing information. And if you wanted to see what that little chunk of bone that we segmented looks like, there it is. So back under segmentation, let's create a surface out of that, and now you can see that this is the portion of the bone. So if I wanted to create a direct bone stop where it indexes on this, now I have this bone. Now the challenge is, when I build a guide, I've got to build it on one model or another. I can't build it on two models simultaneously. So what I'm going to do to get past that fact is I'm going to go ahead and export this. So I'm going to go to File, Export Data. All I want to export is that bone model and the stone model. And we'll save this under my downloads. Call this bone and stone. And now what I'm going to do is open that in Mesh Mixer. Okay, so we've got two different models here, and I exported them together, so right now the software sees them as one STL. But if I just select this one and hit Y or go up to Edit Separate, now I see, if you see, I have two different STLs. Okay, so I want to start by first of all doing a plane cut on this model. And now, do you have to do where all of this is sitting on bone? Honestly, you really just need the distal most part sitting on bone. So I could even cut maybe right there. Okay. And now, remember, the idea is I want to combine these into a single model, one single water type model. So I don't need the bone anterior to this. I could maybe plane cut that and discard the part anterior to this. So we've got two objects, Control Select, Boolean Union. And now we have this as one water type mesh. If you kind of want to see that, if I was to make a cut through here, you see how now this is all one single model. It's not multiple face groups. So I'll cancel that, and this is going to be what I now export as the new bone and stone model. And now that that's done, I can get rid of that. I'm just going to pull right back in that exact same model. Now remember, if you've not changed its orientation outside of the program, you should not have to stitch that. So here you see the blue, which is our original stone model, and now we have this one. So with that done, let's go back and just generate the guide. So I'm going to advanced mode. I'm going to turn on my guide tubes, and you can see that now when it builds this guide, this back one should extend all the way down to the bone, which is exactly what we want to do. So guide panel, draw curve. I don't really have to extend very far behind this at all, nor do I have to have a very deep boundary on this. So I can minimize my flap reflection. That's really why I prefer this. So I'm just going to go out to the width of the guide tubes, and then we'll continue around. And then make the last node join the first right there, and let's create the surgical guide. Okay, and there we have our guide. If you wanted to make this even less obtrusive in contour, you could take a cut tool and just come in here and cut this back in the area of where your flap will be. Now the lingual, I don't generally reflect a flap. Typically what I'll do with a case like this is I'll put the guide on, I'll mark my spots where the guide's going to go with the little indelible ink marker, and then I'll make my incision just lingual to that area so that I'm only reflecting a buccal flap, and the lingual flap edge would be about right through there. And so we would only be fighting one flap, and you can see I don't have to flap very far. And then looking from underneath, you can see starting from about right here, this is sitting directly on bone. All right. If I made this guide transparent, you can see it sits directly onto that bone surface. So now you can imagine you put this thing on, you've got to reflect just enough to expose that crestal bone, and when you seat your guide, there's no possibility that it can tip, and you've got lesser of a surgical flap. So those would be the two different ways I would go about this. You know, if I was doing this on both sides, you would do the same thing over here, segment a little piece of bone, combine the models, build the guide on it, or use your pins. So that's really the two options you've got.